Okay.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say hi to the group. We're really thrilled you're here. I'm going to try to zoom myself so you can see I'll say the embarrassing story first. It was February 2020. They're installing this. I actually asked the question, what exactly is Zoom? I'm thinking, geez, how could you? Now it's like, like, what's a car? Everybody knows it. Okay, I am Joe Sweeterman. I'm professor at DePaul University, director of Chadwick Institute. We're great to have in the room here today. It looks like about 8 of us. And I've known Gary Scott for quite some time as a grad student at DePaul and Chadwick Scott for a while. But we really like the fact that our missions merge so well. Building great cities, pedestrian environments, dynamic neighborhoods. And so we like it to be a hub up here. We're right kind of near the Art Institute of Chicago. So right literally inside the loop. So it's a fun place to come. But the pandemic has forced us to, look in the mirror and say, what is the future of cities? What's going to happen? We're pretty optimistic, but delighted to see we got people all over the US, it looks like here. So I'm going to sit and listen for a little while and enjoy some of the presentations. And so just want to say welcome. And if you're in downtown Chicago, feel free to look us up and we'll give you a tour and come see our great city.
Thanks, Joe.
Should we turn it over?
Yeah, I'll come over here. So, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Emerging Leaders Task Force today, wherever you're at. If you're in New Haven, if you're in San Francisco, if you're here in Chicago, or if you're joining virtually. So I'm so glad everyone took time out of the day to be here, and it seems like we're having pretty good weather in all of our locations, I think. I'm not 100% sure. Spencer, could you advance to the next slide? Okay, cool. So here's just some pictures of our locations that we're at, but again, welcome. So glad everyone is here. And I'll be just talking about the Emerging Leader Task Force for a second. So the Place Summit essentially stemmed out of Place Summit is an event, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but the Emerging Leaders Task Force is a group of new urbanists, which is newly created in August about empowering emerging professionals in the new urbanism movement. So creating kind of that pipeline of leadership. So encouraging a wider range of voices to join the discussion about the future of CNU and what we stand for, and really having a seat at the table, having a voice. And I've been lucky to be involved with CNU for about 8 years. And I think it's really exciting that we have leaders, emerging leaders that are ready to step up to the plate and take on and tackle a lot of issues. So yeah. And I'm going to pass it to Spencer. So.
Hi, everybody. I'm joining virtually. I'll be helping facilitate the virtual side of the hub this weekend. Look forward to having that conversation later. Quickly, just a brief overview of what the mission statement is. So what is this group? What is the Emerging Leaders Task Force? This is something that if you've been on some of our calls starting in the summer, over the summer and the fall, we've been kind of ideating and figuring out exactly what we want this to be. This is our latest working draft of what the mission statement is. So thanks for everybody's input on that. So the Emerging Leaders Task Force advances the goals of the Charter of the New Urbanism with a focus on empowering emerging leaders to shape the future of the Congress for the New Urbanism. So we are committed to including emerging leaders from diverse backgrounds and interests while making personal and professional connections to foster a thriving community. So we're all about advancing and empowering a diversity of folks coming into the leadership role to help evolve what new urbanism shakes out to be in the future. I'll pass it over to, I think, Camille and Cal in the San Francisco Berkeley hub to take it from here.
Great, thank you, Spencer. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So basically what is a Place Summit? Why are we all here? Why are we meeting? So place summits are a meeting of people with various ages, backgrounds, and experience who seek interaction with and motivation from others who share a passion for place, people, and purpose. Place summits have been happening within CNU for about 15 to 20 years. This is a concept that was presented to me just last year. And so I brought it to the group to, thinking that we should all meet and see what comes about having us all meet and talk about what we're passionate about. So that is why we're all here, and hope that, right. And so it takes me into what are the goals of the Place Summit. The ELFT group will use this Place Summit and the ideas it generates as a catalyst to begin encouraging emerging professionals to sit at the table, equipping them through education and connecting them with other emerging professionals and mentors. This Place Summit is also intended for emerging professionals within and tangential to new urbanist movement to connect with other like-minded professionals and advocates. We're just meeting here, but we hope that, we can use this to bring more people into the group and connect with others who might not know about our group or the new urbanist movement.
Okay. So how are we going to accomplish this goal? So hopefully you all know, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So hopefully you all know that we're hoping to hear from all of you and that each of you will give a 5-minute presentation followed by some discussion with whomever is in your hub. And as I hope, again, these presentations can be about anything that interests you. So this, as long as it's, tangential to new urbanism. And the hope is that once we kind of get discussing what are all these things that, really matter to us, then we can kind of set some realistic tasks for the future. And we can have some goals about, how does the ELTF actually interact with CNU? And how are we going to continue to reach out to more and more emerging professionals who might also be very interested in CNU? We're also going to be talking about the name of our group. We are the Emerging Leaders Task Force right now, but we do want to open up the discussion and rename us and decide on a name that really fits our goals a little bit better. And then finally, there's going to be some additional action items that hopefully will be brought up in discussion, such as how, if there's an orientation at the actual annual CNU for emerging leaders and students as well, what does that look like and how can we be a part of that? And also a book club. Our book club will be meeting on October 21st. And I'm hoping those of you who are not already part of the ELTF will consider joining us, but those details will be discussed later. So yeah, our opening schedule, our general schedule is that we are starting today with the opening, and that's all of us. And then we're going to be breaking out into our individual hubs. So in SF, all of us are going to be showing presentations to each other in Chicago, in New York, and virtually. That will all be happening. And then we're going to reconvene for a midday discussion where we want to talk about some of the big topics that we discussed together and really continue to brainstorm into different breakout groups and come up with some ideas there. We're also going to be doing the name workshop at that time. And then we're going to break apart again, and there's going to be walking tours and other events. And then Sunday, if there are still some short presentations early in the morning, followed by our closing. So that's the general schedule. So that's it.
So again, Luke Sims, I'm a planner in southeastern Minnesota, right in the middle of the Mississippi River. So I border the state of Wisconsin, which is our drunkest state in the United States. And that's near and dear to my heart because my family is from Wisconsin. And more importantly, we're entering in on our comprehensive planning process, looking toward 2045. And so we've been doing a little bit of land use searching, et cetera. And one of the things that's really unique about my city is that's more similar to Wisconsin in that regard, in terms of having these third places scattered around neighborhoods that are bars. And Spencer, I'm going to try and, can I share my screen just to do quick little rundowns?
Yeah, let's hope that I can do that.
I thought this might be somewhat interesting because maybe we don't realize what that scale is. My sister married an Englishman and lives in the UK. And when I think about the UK, I think about neighborhood pubs, and I think about going to those locations and people stopping for a drink after work, et cetera. and really having a communal space that we outlaw basically everywhere in the United States. And even in my little town where we have lots of neighborhood bars, we outlaw them as well. So I pulled this from Business Insider because why do the work when they do it for me? In the United Kingdom, you have 58 pubs per 100,000 residents. Here in the United States, the upper Midwest is really pulling its weight. Well, the rest of you who might be in the Northeast or the South, you guys got to get on it and have more bars. But the really big leader here is Wisconsin, Montana, where I used to also live and work, and North Dakota just don't really have the population density. And so what I've been doing is I've been going through and taking a look at what that works, or what that looks like, excuse me. And I'm realizing now that I can't actually move. There we go. So this is in Burlington, Wisconsin. This is a longtime bar that has been featured numerous times. It's just perfect. There's a little church right to the left there. Here's another bar. This is Fish's Bar in La Crosse, Wisconsin. As you can tell, right next to single family homes and duplexes and triplexes. This is the Handy Corner in my town of Winona. This is the High and Low in Winona. Again, right next to all these houses. No parking for any of these. This is the King's Corner in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Leroy's in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Logan's Bar in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Neighborhood Bar in Racine, Wisconsin. A perfect name for a bar. Rogers Place, Racine, Wisconsin. Shimmy's Bar in La Crosse. You know, the Shortstop Bar, Sloppy Joe's. Really great names for all these places. Strasser's, right across the street from an outdoor play area at a church school. And all of these things are, when we talk about zoning or we talk about planning for communities, people, you know, they want the buffer away from the bar, or they want to make sure there isn't going to be a noise complaint. They're talking about negative externalities. Here's tailgaters in La Crosse. And they want to stop this type of thing from happening, even in a place like Wisconsin, where it's clearly a part of the culture. I'm literally dropping pins in random neighborhoods and finding dozens of bars within walkable locations. Here's Tommy's in Racine, that anybody could go to. And I've been calling around because, you know, I'm entering this process for work. And I'm asking people, you know, hey, fellow planner who probably went to the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota or went to UW-Madison, which is a great place. And they're all going, oh, I wish those bars were in those neighborhoods. Oh, no, they need to be on the outskirts. They need to be downtown. And it's just, you know, we all know this probably because I'm preaching to the choir, but it's just not the right attitude to take. And ideally, the way that we would be approaching this would be to essentially legalize anything you want on a street corner and then build in from there. If somebody has a bar next to you, why can't you have a coffee shop? Why can't you have a bakery, etc.? Of course, I say that, and sad news on my end, my city manager was fired yesterday. So I guess that direction probably won't be where we go. But anyway, I hope maybe you guys have appreciation for neighborhood bars. There are a ton of them in the upper Midwest if you guys want to ever come and visit. And I think that it's really important to re-legalize that third place and have a stopover and a drink. But anyway, I've also been calling a historian at the Wisconsin Historical Society, and they were giving a presentation back in 2015 because there were about 10,000 bars that closed across the United States between 2004 and 2014. And Wisconsin Public Radio was giving, you know, kind of a 10-year anniversary look at that. And everybody was calling in on this program, talking to this Jim Drager fellow who's a historian. And everyone's talking about how it was the smoking ban that was killing all these bars, or they're talking about how you can't find any parking at these bars, et cetera. And the real truth is, it's just because it's illegal and those bars finally do close, either because of the smoking ban or because of something different, which there's no correlation to a smoking ban, by the way. They can't be remade, you know, and we lose them forever, which is really unfortunate, even though it becomes part of our culture. And that's my short 5-minute talk on neighborhood bars. Hopefully I can re-legalize them in my tiny town, and then you guys can follow suit.
All right, so I did my presentation on tactical urbanism, responses to the pandemic, which is kind of just a fancy title for outdoor bars and closed streets. So in New York City, there's two main programs. There's open restaurants and open streets. So open restaurants is a year-round program that allows bars and restaurants to place outdoor seating in front of their establishments in the sideway or roadway. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. Your cities all probably have this too. So in New York, there's over 12,000 restaurants that have outdoor dining, which is pretty amazing for how quick it kind of all shifted into this. So now we went from pretty much 0 to 12,000 all within what, about a year and a half. And then same thing with open streets. So open streets is the same concept, but it basically closes down streets and opens up for pedestrian uses. So cyclists can use it. There's outdoor yoga classes, like you can see in the bottom right picture. And de Blasio set a goal of 100 miles of the city streets to be dedicated for this. I think right now there's 60-ish plus miles, but it's quickly expanding. And there's actually also a cross between both these programs. So they combine open restaurants with open streets. They close down a whole street and then just open it up to the restaurants. My street actually does this, and it's kind of chaos, and I'm going to get into that in a few slides. So Luke, I think you like this bar. This is my neighborhood bar. It's right on the corner. It's called Bandits. So I kind of included a few examples of bars too. You guys are going to be seeing a lot of bars today because it shows that the outdoor dining actually can be pretty creative and aesthetically pleasing. So aside from the obvious benefits that like it reduces strain on restaurants with indoor occupancy limits, it also reallocates usable area of the streets from cars back to humans, which is kind of a basic tenet of new urbanism. So this place is great. I mean, it looks beautiful. It's kind of 1970s-ish. It's in my opinion, it's a lot prettier than just seeing more cars parked in the street or trash piling up. So then here's another great example too. It's Don Angie in the West Village. And one interesting thing too that ties back again to Luke's presentation. So in the West Village, in a lot of neighborhoods in New York, but specifically the West Village, I don't know if this was intentional, but a lot of the corners are actually cafes and like little cute like restaurants or bars. And then the main street itself are like brownstones and it's residential, but on almost every street corner, there's a bar like this one. So this one's actually in a street corner. So as you can see, it says it's designed by GRT architects. And it was really made to kind of give like a sense of like beauty back to the street. And they designed it over, they designed it after a railroad car. So you can kind of see that design elements. Pretty cool, but I'm gonna go into a little bit more details with how this kind of, the range of design varies a lot. So Square Diner Tribeca, this is an example of art being incorporated into outdoor dining. And this kind of creates more of a sense of community. It gives more outlets to artists. So like this is another angle of outdoor dining, but there's some issues. There's unclear rules and regulations. So this is actually from a New York Post article that I read a while back. There was this Japanese restaurant that tried to create a double-decker outdoor dining shed. And all the neighbors were calling 311 saying like, is this illegal? Is this that? And I think at the time there weren't any rules explicitly saying that it was illegal and they couldn't do it. So then the committee that was overseeing it had to create something on the spot saying, no, you can't do that. There's no second floor sheds. But it kind of shows just how this was kind of like the Wild West at first. So some other issues, increase the noise, that's a common one. And then concerns about ADA accessibility on the sidewalk. So if you have waiters and waitresses going back and forth between the shed and the restaurant, there may be some issues with them running into people, things getting in the way, or there might be more seats and tables out on the sidewalk, which makes it harder to get by with a wheelchair. So, and then I kind of mentioned too before, like with my street, that's kind of a blend between open streets and open restaurants, where it's a street closed and then the restaurants take it over. It's the increase in noise is nuts. Luckily, I'm in the back of my apartment building and I honestly face a brick wall, so I get zero noise. But I guess that's one benefit of my window facing a brick wall instead of the street. But on the street side, it's so loud on the weekends that it's kind of insane. So that's one drawback. But I mean, if you're moving into a neighborhood that has a policy like this in place, you should probably know what you're getting into, or just living in New York City in general, you should know that pretty much anywhere is going to be noisy. So since then, there's been quite a few more rules that were made. So you can see kind of like an outline of how the outdoor dining should be laid out. So there's like a minimum clearance, and then there's different things like a barricade that has to be put in place, reflective tape, of course, like the typical like 15 feet from a fire hydrant, like when you park your car and whatnot. But so the issue with this too is there's no clear rules that are written, like there's nothing set in stone about this. So there's I put it down a timeline of how long all this is going to take. So this fall and then the next fall there's going to be changes to the zoning, changes to local laws and whatnot, and then there's going to be a permanent program application in winter 2022, and then hopefully by 2023 it's going to be a permanent program, which I'm excited about. I mean, I do love these setups. It's a lot better, and it definitely eases a lot of strain in New York on the restaurants. And I quite frankly don't know how these restaurants operated before the pandemic with their limited indoor seating, because it is so tight inside a lot of these restaurants that even with outdoor seating, sometimes I'll go to a restaurant, the wait's like an hour, even though they've quadrupled their total occupancy. So it's kind of fascinating. And then with open streets, here's some examples of what the open streets look like. Some of these are examples of the street being blended with open restaurants, like the one in the top right and the bottom left. And actually all of these are open street, open restaurant concepts. And then this one is kind of like just a normal open streets one where it's used for cyclists. This is Park Ave. This is actually my old apartment building on the left, or not apartment building, office building. But so it's pretty cool. It's I actually rode on Park Ave when they closed down the whole thing and they did a complete open streets initiative. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's definitely a lot safer than riding bikes on Park Ave during rush hour. So I think it's a good idea. And then a few of the benefits. So here, for example, you can see some kids playing. There's actually another street right around the block from me that has a small elementary school on it, and they closed down the whole street and they let the kids play out on the street during recess every day. So there's, of course, a lot of benefits for socialization, exercise, building a sense of community. And then I couldn't find a stat on this for New York City, but I found one for St. Louis, and it says 89% of respondents in St. Louis said their open streets program positively impacted their feelings for the city. So I'll leave you with this question: open streets and open restaurants, are they the future of tactical urbanism in cities?
So I'm going to talk about urban and regional scale responses to climate change. A lot of this is based on a book that I read recently called The City in the Coming Climate by Brian Stone Jr., who's a professor of city and regional planning at Georgia Tech. So one of the big ideas of the book is that the global scale discussion around climate change, while important, misses some important points about how climate change impacts the specific places where people live and their well-being in those places. And probably the best example of that is the urban heat island effect. So this is probably something we're all familiar with, but the idea is that urban areas are generally warmer than the areas surrounding them. And this becomes more severe in extreme heat events. So the difference gets larger during extreme heat. And that's really problematic, especially as in the average year, deaths and hospitalizations in heat waves outpace any other weather-related health impacts. And then the regional scale also plays into this because the climate in, say, an urban center isn't just determined by what's going on in that area, but also what's going on around it. So whether that's a forest or agriculture or like low density sprawl, those all contribute differently. So I'll just fly through some of the proposed responses. Obviously, a full discussion of this could go on for hours, but some of the ones that I thought were really interesting, the biggest one at the urban scale is vegetation. I really enjoyed learning about sort of the physical explanation of this because it utilizes like a really basic physical science property that water has a really high specific heat. So it can absorb a lot of heat before becoming a gas. And that makes things like street trees really useful because they can take in a lot of heat and then let it off in the form of water vapor before it gets to like the surface of the street, which would instead hang on to it and then let it out at night, which keeps temperatures high. And that the effect of that is that it makes it harder for people to recover during a heat wave if there isn't a cooling at night, and that can really increase hospitalizations. Some others, so green roofs and like green walls are also explored as potentially promising, especially in places where the physical properties, whether the streets are too narrow or the buildings are too tall to make trees really viable. Those are options. And then one that I thought was really interesting was this green factor idea, which is basically uses a similar point system to LEED, but as part of the building approval process. So you would need to reach a certain total of points contributing to the environmental performance of a building, but you can get there via a green roof or permeable pavers or trees or other planting in whatever combination works well. I just think it's really cool that it allows for that adaptability. The limitation of a lot of this is water scarcity. So I'm from California, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about like, oh, how could areas around San Francisco implement this? And it's just tough because the idea of especially starting to irrigate trees to build up an urban forest is kind of a tough sell at the moment. And so the big alternative to that is albedo enhancement, which the most famous example is probably LA doing their white streets. But there are other ways that can happen with light colored or reflective roofing as well, which has more benefits in that it's usually out of sight of people. And then the last one is reducing waste heat. So there are a lot of processes that happen in urban areas that produce heat that just kind of goes out into the environment instead of being used for anything. The biggest ones are vehicle traffic and air conditioning. I thought the air conditioning one was really interesting because it's kind of inconvenient in terms of like the most obvious response to urban heat is like expand air conditioning in more residential units, but you run into complications with that making this problem at like the scale of the entire city potentially worse. And then that phenomenon of waste heat is amplified in low density areas because, you know, thermodynamically, especially if you think about heating a single family detached house, you're losing heat on 5 sides, as opposed to if you're in an apartment that has units all around it, it's potentially only 1 side. And that sort of takes us to the regional scale, where dense transit-oriented development is really sort of the way forward, even though dense, as we all know, even though dense areas tend to intensify the heat island in their specific location, if that comes with limiting the extent of lower density development on net for a region, that's a benefit. And then things that can take the place of some of that lower density development, green belting, whether that's returning like just actual reforestation or incorporating a forest into agricultural production in the area. Agroforestry is a really interesting option there. And then something that wasn't touched on in this book that I read as much, but that I'm really interested in are potentially other forms of ecosystem restoration that can help contribute to both the regional and global scale, helping to address climate change. So, you know, in the Bay Area, I think a lot about wetland restoration and kelp forest restoration, because both of those have the potential both to sequester carbon, but also to really improve the local climate in terms of living and cooling and increasing precipitation. The challenges with a lot of the solutions at this scale is that it requires coordinating land use at the regional scale instead of the scale of the individual municipality. So there are challenges associated with that. And then the overall framework that sort of emerges from this that I think is really promising, they call adaptive mitigation. And the idea is focusing on solutions at the intersection of reducing global greenhouse effect, and local climate resilience. So different urban greening projects are really good examples where you both get improved flood performance for the city, but then also you contribute to global cooling. This is promising because it has the potential for building consensus in communities that wouldn't necessarily be receptive to addressing climate change when it's framed at the global scale, when it's more related to tangible impacts on people's lives, and they can both participate in the conversation and also experience the benefits. It's a lot more possible to push that conversation forward. The cons I think are a little bit minor, but I think it's worth pointing out, like global and local needs don't always overlap. So the heat island example, from that perspective, if you're focusing on limiting heat island where people live, then a power plant that's off away from where people live that isolates a lot of energy production, even if it still emits a lot of greenhouse gases, doesn't pose a huge problem. But at the global scale, that's worth interrogating. The other thing is that it places the emphasis on where people live. And while that's valuable in a lot of ways, it also isn't necessarily the whole picture. You lose, obviously, a lot of ecosystems where humans don't live, and valuing all of those non-human organisms and what they contribute to the global climate. So yeah, those are just some thoughts. I'm really interested to hear what you all have to say.
So I'm gonna do a very scattered conversation because that's just how I am. So I thought I would talk about just my hometown, because for me, how I got so passionate about urbanism was just because of how little freedom I had growing up. So obviously Latin American neighborhoods, like your typical single family neighborhood, is very different to suburbia, but it's still interesting and it still sucks, but so I'm just gonna show you a couple of pictures of the town I grew up in. So just for context, this is just a zoom in of an area of Tegucigalpa, that's my hometown. So it is pretty dense. I think it's like 22,000 people per square mile. It's decent density, but still very much designed for cars. So I never, I swear, if I walked on the streets once a month, that was a lot. Never walked outside, which is pretty sad. But yeah, so your typical neighborhood, your typical neighborhood or house is always, have most of you been to Latin America or no? Some of you? And I've seen this across, not just in Honduras, but going to Ecuador, Guatemala, El Salvador. Houses are usually a lot more private. So you're built with that wall in front of your house and a gate in. So people are very paranoid about security. It's kind of like living in a cage. Pretty sad. But I mean, I like growing up, but yeah. So yeah, so I've seen across the last 10 years, this interesting thing has started to happen with crime going up. People took an approach that's so anti-urban to how to make your neighborhood safe. And they call it El Barrio Seguro, which means safe neighborhood. And the government has allowed your upper middle class, it's middle class neighborhoods to completely close down a network of streets, just so it's more safe and not any car can drive through, which leads to obviously a lot of problems with traffic and just so many other things. It's just not ideal. Even if you think just an accident, in a fire truck can't get through a big network of streets. It's so unfortunate. But yeah, so this is my neighborhood. I spent some time walking during COVID when the entire thing was closed down all day. But yeah, so there's a lack of sidewalks. This is just, oh, and this is how the gates are. So they basically for this set of maybe 4 blocks more, they put gates all around. So then people who are not residents can't enter. And there's just one entry. So it's even super inconvenient for residents. again, a couple more pictures. So cars parked everywhere, super car-centric design, complete neglect to like pedestrian safety. So you can see here, it's like, it'd be so easy to build 2 steps, but people don't really do that. And there's no control over it. Right next, my house is like going this way. We have a park that used to be open, but now it's closed just because people don't want people who are not residents to go in. And it's so counterproductive because I was like, we should push for like a good design for this park, but residents just don't want it because they don't want it to be public and for anyone to be able to come. So it's very sad. Another so I guess part of the reason I'm giving this presentation is just because it's hard for me sometimes, because obviously I love being with my family, but I really struggle when I'm home because I get so frustrated with everything that is getting built and how, like when you're in the US, there's like a lot more hope, just like, with groups like this one where we're talking about all these different things that are that have started that are helping to build more walkable communities and, more investment in public transportation. But it seems like we're behind and like things are just happening the other way. Like the mayor of my city is an engineer, and for him, he's just trying to build like a Houston in the middle of a city where things don't fit. So he's like building all these bridges in the center of town where it makes 0 sense, as you can see here. Completely gonna block the view of homes like the ones here. So just very sad. And a weird part of it is like a lot of residents are almost happy with this because they had not seen investment in the city at all. So like they're like, oh, at least this guy's like spending some money in the cities. But like I feel like there's not enough conversation on what if all this money that's being spent in bridges is actually spent in public transportation, especially in like our city. It's like I think we have like 1.5 million people living there, but there's like huge levels of inequality, and like in reality there's like 20% of the population or has a car. So it's like building these bridges is not really helping the majority of people. So there's that. The most urban thing I've seen ever happening was during COVID, where since markets were closed, we got a little, farmers market happening every Friday. So the people from the huge city market would come to like specific neighborhoods on different days of the week. And that was really cute. There's a lot of community engagement there. Yeah, so I just put this picture, to see like, like your older church compared to like the newer one. Well, not necessarily newer, but like how it's been isolated by cars. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, I don't know. So I know this was like, this conversation had no point on where it was going. But I just wanted to share a little bit of where I grew up in, not walking anywhere, just stuck in a car forever. And like, obviously there are a lot of people who walk in the city, which is, I think it's very sad because it's not a pleasant walk for anyone. Sidewalks are typically like, 2 feet wide. So it's very unsafe. There's a lot of topography. So not ideal, and public transportation sucks. So I put this rainbow because, I'm like, is there hope? I don't know. I hope so. But yeah, that's it.
Okay, cool. So I wanted to talk about, I don't really have a slide deck. I have a few visual aids that we'll get to, but I just wanted to kind of have a conversation about what the heck is going on in the state of California related to combating the housing crisis. But I wanted to also talk about that in terms of like how it relates to new urbanism and some tools that us as new urbanists would promote and could utilize to combat not only the housing crisis in California, but of course, the crises in other places in the country as well. But it's kind of funny, as I was thinking about Baxter's presentation and thinking about all the stuff that's coming down from the state to combat the housing crisis in California, and like, what's it all going to be worth if it all burns up anyway? But I guess that's something that we'll face in a few decades. So a lot of articles have come out on this topic, and maybe you've read some of these if you're interested. But hopefully I can just touch on kind of a quick snapshot of what's going on and then how it relates to CNU here in about 5 minutes or so. So last month there was a recall attempt for Governor Newsom, and that failed, and so he's maintained to be our governor. And after that, he immediately started signing a lot of legislation related to housing. So since mid-September, there's just been like a flurry of bills signed, and arguably the most monumental is Senate Bill 9, SB 9. And the people in kind of my circles here in California are just starting to wrap our heads around exactly what that means, especially for me as someone who works a lot in zoning and form-based codes. I'm kind of trying to contextualize what this bill will mean for the type of projects that we work on in the state of California. But actually in the last week, I think Newsom signed like 27 more bills other than SB 8, 9, and 10. And so there's just like a lot to wrap our heads around. So a lot of us Californians are kind of running around figuring out what the heck we're gonna have to do. But let's start with like a few background points. So median home price in California is $800,000, which is the highest in the states. So at a state level, it's just got the highest median home price. The current estimate for the necessary housing supply to fix the housing crisis is somewhere between 1.8 and 3.5 million housing units. And California averages right now the construction of fewer than 90,000 residential units a year. So we're like way off, that's the point. And so that's what is trying to be combated at the state level. They're basically saying, look, at the local level, this isn't being taken care of. It's a huge problem. And the state needs to step in and start taking away local control so that we can fix the issue and ultimately ultimately promote the economic development of California going forward. So Senate Bill 9, like I said, was signed last month. It's effective January 1st. And just a few bullet points on what it does. First and foremost, it allows property owners in any single family zone to build 2 units. So basically at the state level, they've eliminated single family zoning effective January 1st. But in addition to that, it goes one step further and says that you can, if you're in a single family zone, you can now split your lot in 2 and create 2 units on each of those. So essentially they're saying you can, where we previously only allowed 1 unit, you can now have 4 if you want to. But both new parcels need to be at least 1,200 square feet, which is like really small for a parcel area, but they're basically just trying to say like, you can split your lot as long as you have adequate amount of space to provide some sort of small unit or units if you want. So you could have 2 duplexes on a lot where you used to only have 1 house. But the property owner must sign an affidavit that says that they'll stay on site in one of the units for at least 3 subsequent years. So that's an attempt to avoid like land speculation, big developers coming in and saying, oh, great, now we can like build 4 units where we can only build 1 before, and we can sell them all for $1 million and just make a shit ton of money. So they're trying to avoid that by saying, you have to live on site essentially as the property owner. But the Turner Center, which is a housing innovation center out of UC Berkeley, estimates that the new law could add about 660,000 new housing units across the state over the next several years. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately up to the property owner to decide what they do. So it's kind of hard to predict. It's pretty subjective. The property owner may or may not do it, and depending on, their interests. So that being said, the estimate is that less than 5% of the 7.5 million single family lots will actually end up changing in the state. So that's a quick snapshot. Basically, the key takeaway is 4 units where you can only do 1 before. So I wanted to show, I'll share my screen. I wanted to show a couple examples out of where I live. So we don't really know, and this is where the new Urbanist tools come in. We don't really know what this is going to look like. Like if you don't have strong standards, they could be pretty ugly. So I wanted to show you some examples of the town I live in, of just like multi-unit structures that fit these bills generally. and what it could end up being. And most of these examples are like old, like pre-50s, because they're just like, grandfathered into the neighborhoods. But this is 2 units. It's kind of got a big setback, and it's not really that pretty at all. But so it's a box, but it's in the single family neighborhood, mostly. And it just sits at the corner, and it fits in really well, right? This is like a bungalow court thing. So it's actually 9 units. So it goes above and beyond the 4, but the scale is like probably what they're expecting. They've got like 6 units around this like courtyard. And then there's actually like 3 that face the street over here. So it's like a 1.5 bungalow unit situation that has no parking. This is a triplex, and actually in the back of the lot, there's 3 more units. So this ends up being 6. There's 2 stacked and then 1 over a garage. And I actually lived in this unit for 3 years, so that's why I'm familiar with it. But it's again, not that pretty, but it fits, what the bill generally wants to see. This is a 4-plex, so standard block 4-plex. This is exactly what, if you were to tear down a single family house and build new development, this is generally what, the bill says you can do. And then this is a duplex, but it looks like a duplex on the street. But if you look behind it, there's at least 2 or 3 units behind that are stacked in the kind of ugly California way, where they've got like garage parking underneath. You can kind of see it. And then like units above on this weird like pencil podium. But this part is cute, and a duplex. So these are just like existing precedent for like kind of what I think this bill is going for generally. I mean, they're not all exactly accurate, but that's basically it. So then how does this relate to urbanism? These bills will generally force cities to relinquish control of micromanaged design review process. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. It's taking away local control in a lot of ways, by saying no more planning commission, city council, subjective, time-consuming review periods. So they cost a lot of money to do that, and they take a lot of time. And those are 2 things that we're kind of running out of at this point. But the fact is, like, cities and community members still want to have a say in the process, of course, because who knows your community better than the people who live there. So there are ways still around that. It's just establishing objective standards in whatever zoning approach you have that facilitate and kind of work with these bills. So a lot of times it's objective design standards, so just dimensional requirements that leave out any sort of like subjective, like, oh, it would be great if it looked like this, or, buildings should generally front the street. It's ditching all that language and saying just what it has to be. And empowering community members to provide input on that side of the process, not after the fact. It's kind of saying like the way around this to really build in what the community wants to see, knowing that the state's going to force this upon them, is to do something like a form-based code, or is to do objective design standards that the community members can provide input on proactively, and not retroactively during the design review process, where they're kind of picking over details. Because essentially, these approvals can be done at the administrative staff level. So planning commission, city council, community members won't see a lot of these potentially, 4 units on a single family lot. They won't see a lot of those projects come through the process. So it's getting ahead of the potential issue, or the desire for community members to provide input by kind of rethinking the zoning and baking in their comments at that time. So all that being said, it also has the potential to transform California to be a lot more missing middle housing friendly. So duplex to 4-plex type situations. And that being said, that aligns a lot with CNU, right? And form-based coding and missing middle housing, and kind of creating this toolkit that can work collectively with how community members want to provide input at the onset of the process, but also streamline housing development and try to fix the crisis. So anyway, these principles relate a lot to other states too. I know there's a lot of places where a housing crisis is happening. It's not just California. But the point is, if we can think about getting ahead of subjective design review processes and utilizing new urbanist tools at the same time, then we can provide this framework of objective standards that results in higher quality development for a variety of diverse housing types. So that's basically all I wanted to say.